Well, while this is setting up, just let me welcome the people who are here tonight, who haven't been here all the time. You are welcome here. So, what I'd like to do tonight is bring some of the threads of what we've been touching on together a little bit, as best I can. So remember last night the beautiful words of Nyakao. Nyakao says, so simply, as for doing evil, just avoid it. There is, of course, a lifetime of practice in that word just. And then he said, as for the good, practice sharing it. So he doesn't speak about doing good, he speaks about the good. Apparently it doesn't need doing. I'd like to look into that. And I'd like to bring it together with the rider I mentioned in our closing words last night, that come up in the Lojong slogan, the Lojong system of slogans, which is a Tibetan training of compassion, training the mind in compassion, a whole 50-odd series of slogans. I think there's 52 altogether, and the last of them is don't expect applause, which I think is a very wise rounding off to the whole process. But the fifth of them is this. He actually says do good, but we could say practice sharing good, avoid evil, and then he says celebrate your lunacy, pray for help. Now that's a very interesting kind of, it's actually not a celebrate, it's appreciate your lunacy. And that is a very interesting elaboration of how human we are. And I wouldn't want to give away any of that humanness. So Stephen always asks for titles for the talks when they go online, and I think the title today would be Nothing to Reject. Nothing to Reject. And if you were on the walk today, remember we set off with the quest of finding just one thing that was not intrinsically accomplished and perfect. Now, since no one came up with a single thing, I can only assume that you already understand there is nothing to reject, and I can close this up and leave it to the insect sounds of the night. But also this morning we chanted, for the first time in this session, we chanted Torei Zenji, Bodhisattva's Vow. Now, Torei Zenji was a man who had to deal with lifelong anger issues. And so out of that appreciation, deep appreciation of his own lunacy in that regard, comes that exquisite Bodhisattva's Vow, which asks us to find, even in extreme moments of receiving abuse and being placed violently in the wrong by somebody else, that we can find an open response to such abuse, one that is wide open in all directions. The wind, the abuse, blow right through. There is no one there to take offence. There is instead, as he says, a most profound and pure faith that can arise in that relinquishment of self in the face of extreme, lunacy, let's face it. So this open response is a very beautiful thing to examine, especially in the light of nothing to reject. You could really say that the whole of Sesshin is the practice of the open response, moment by moment. Zazen is sitting as the open response. The response is very subtle, minutely subtle. It is happening both dynamically and subtly in every moment of being with circumstances, not opposing and not clinging to them. That is quite arduous at times to maintain. And out of that arduous practice, a very, I guess you could say, rare and deeply valuable joy arises. These are some of the things I'd like to explore. And there's a number of cases that sort of talk to each other in the realm of these matters, taking up the fact that the ultimate self-mastery, ultimate challenge and self-mastery is found not in rejecting, but in including. That is the hardest path of all, rejecting nothing. It's much easier to have some idea of this is good, that is bad, I'll just head for the good. But that is actually a kind of impugning of the phrase, the good, in the way that it occurs in that, as for the good, practice sharing it. So, it's not easy to embrace and be with what you dislike and want to be rid of, especially what you dislike about yourself. But, as I said last night, difficulty is what makes the way genuine. It is what makes us genuine. So let's have a look at lunacy. An example of lunacy. In this case, again, an example of anger, of taking affront at apparent abuse. And I love the title of this case. This again is from Entangling Vines. There's a raven out there enjoying things on the water. Very timely for the title of the talk, because it's of the case. It's Drifting to the Land of the Demons. Case 39 of Entangling Vines. Now this is another encounter actually between a very powerful official in 9th century China and a teacher, Dao Tong. The minister, UD, they're not initials, that's two names, asked Dao Tong, excuse me, what is meant by, and now he's quoting, a fierce wind blew a ship off course and set it drifting toward the land of the Rakshasas. Now the land of the Rakshasas is the land of demons, and they're not good to get mixed up with. The master Dao Tong replied, UD, you miserable lackey, why do you ask something like that? UD's face turned white. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen white anger, white hot anger, maybe white with appalled shock at this sort of insult coming to a very high official. Then the master pointed to him and said, you have just drifted to the land of the Rakshasas. And as I said, that UD took this teaching to heart. Well, we discover that he did more than that. He's a very interesting character in his own right. Excuse me. So he started off as something of a Rakshasa himself. He was, after a very distinguished military career, he became a governor, like the character last night. And he was considered to be very able, but that's if you can tolerate arrogance and dictatorial sort of style, that kind of able. Peter Dutton, for example. So during his tenure as governor of Zhangzhou, he actually organized a serious persecution of Buddhism, to the point where he actually summoned all the mendicant monks, all the alms-gathering monks in that prefecture, and brought them to a central court in the distant capital with the intention of executing them. They were condemned to death, and hearing about this, Dao Tung travelled to the capital, where he was immediately arrested and brought into the central court himself, and there he faced you. So here's the account of it. The prefect, seated grandly on a chair, put a hand on the hilt of his sword and asked, "Bah, you teacher, don't you know that the prefect of Zhangyang has the freedom to put you to the sword?" Dao Tong said, "Don't you know a king of Dharma doesn't fear birth and death?" The prefect said, "Priest, have you got ears in your head?" The master responded, "My eyebrows and eyes are unhindered. When I, a poor monk, meet with the prefect in an interview, what kind of hindrance could there be?" At this, the prefect threw away his sword, donned his official uniform, bowed low, and then he asked this question, so he got interested. He asked the question in the case that I just read. "I have heard there's a statement in the teaching that says that the black wind blows the ships and wafts them to the land of the Rakshasas. What does this mean?" And that's when the master responded with that very strong response, "You idiot, what the hell are you idiot," sort of thing. And the prefect found this to be very telling. He ended up becoming, along with one of three other people, considered to be one of the four worthies. That's what they were called. Chinese officials who found their way onto the path in a very serious manner. In fact, Yu was a good friend of Layman Pang and the compiler of the record of Layman Pang, who some people here will have heard of before. Interesting character in his own right. So this interesting moment of finding what it is to drift to the land of demons, the land of the Rakshasas. You could say we're always going to be feeling that drift. It will overtake us, the black wind, from time to time. And you could say that Zen practice is becoming more, the matter or the practice of becoming more and more finely attuned to that drift. Catching it early, feeling the wind, feeling the impulse rising to react. Not respond, not the open response, but the quick reaction. The defensive reaction. Having someone to defend, and thereby having someone else to find wrong and in the wrong. So Zen practice is stepping back from that. Back to that kind of alert poise of practice mind, that dynamic poise we looked at this morning, early in the morning. So I'd like to bring this one in relation to another case from Entangling Vines. This one, case 27, is called "The Mind Turns with Its Surroundings." And it begins by quoting Manora, the 22nd Indian ancestor in the line from the Buddha. And this is what he is said to have said in his transmission verse. At the time of transmission, to be acknowledged as a successor in the Dharma, it was customary to write a verse. So this is his verse. "The mind turns with its surroundings, a turning that is truly profound. Perceive mind's nature within this flow, and there is neither joy nor sorrow." Interesting. I'd like to slow this down and look at it more slowly and carefully. So, the mind turns with its surroundings. And that's, a sense of, can you tell mind apart from the ever-flowing, ever-turning nature of what's happening? Can you tell mind when it is completely, thoroughly at rest or congruent with its surroundings? Of course it's turning with. It's a little bit like this, the kind of leisurely speed with which Torei Zenji finds the open response instead of the fiery reaction. Finds this peaceful, sort of the eye of the storm is entirely peaceful. There's an open response where he does not have to defend himself from abuse. The abuse, the sound of the birds, the rustle of the leaves, much the same, equal. This doesn't mean that the abuse is not heard, but it does not find lodging in the open response. Maybe you can think of some moments in your life where for some reason you failed to respond with some kind of angry self-defense, often a preemptive strike of anger that goes even beyond the apparent abuse. Instead of that, perhaps you found an entirely neutral moment, a moment where you did not need to move an inch. Your heart was not sort of ruffled, and you were able to probably feel concern for the person abusing you rather than anger and distancing. So the mind turns with its surroundings, with whatever is happening. Then he says a turning that is truly profound, and the character translated as profound here can also translate as dark, silent, or mysterious. It's probably the character Myo, and it has those connotations all bound into that single character. It is in fact talking then to prajna, to the mind profoundly at rest in circumstances, empty of any sense of separateness, coming from that place, empty of separate. And at a sort of more, I guess you could say, practical level, you could describe this, for example, as that skillful means of turning back towards no opinion, towards emptiness of self, no self to defend, so that you might come up to that practical, beautiful practical paya of, is it so? Is it so is what is, if those of you who don't know what this is referring to, came from Hakuin. When Hakuin was a young mendicant monk, he was living in a small hut out of a fishing village at the good graces of the village people who were poor, but they looked after him. They liked having a monk, very impassioned character, this monk, working away on his practice in a hut, so they didn't have to do that sort of thing. They could just get on with ordinary life, give him some food and, nice transaction, really. So that went on well for a little while until one night when there's this very heavy knocking on the door, banging on the door. He opened it to find a very angry woman, furious with him, holding a squalling newborn baby, with a young girl looking pointedly at the ground the whole time. And she said, "You thieving phony of a monk, here. We know it's yours. You take the baby." Now, Hakuin had taken a vow of celibacy, and he was a celibate mendicant monk. So this was an enormous sort of moment for him. Could have been a moment where he flared up and said, "How could that possibly be so, you stupid woman," and so on. But he didn't. He said, is it so? And he took the baby into his care. while she stormed off, leaving him to, the insults and judgment of the entire village, making life very hard. He had to look after a newborn baby and manage as best he could, which he did for some weeks before there was another knocking on the door, probably even more angry because she'd been in the wrong the first time. And when he opened the door, there she was again. This time the girl is looking even more pointedly at the ground. And she said, "She told us everything. It's the boy in the fish market. Give us back the baby." So now he's holding this baby. There's no way he's not bonded to the baby at some quite deep level by now. However hard life is, in fact, that makes the bond deeper. A baby demands that the bond forms. There's no choice. So, probably with great difficulty, he said, "Is it so?" and gave back the baby. So that is the open response in practical form. There's no "it is so" or "it is not so." It is, is it so? Is a newborn baby not the baby of anyone who is in reach and able to give help? Does a newborn baby belong to everybody at some level? Responsibility. Cannot single it out. So then the next line of this verse of Menorahs is perceive mind's nature, meaning perceive your own self-nature, this matter, the great matter which we investigate here, within this flow, nowhere else, within this flow. And he's virtually saying, and then you'll see that within the flowing nature of mind, we come to the last line, there is neither joy nor sorrow. How interesting. Neither joy nor sorrow. Now, you could understand that as, well, perfect equanimity. But I think there's a deeper way to understand it, which is to see that joy is, of course, unopposed to sorrow, completely. It utterly includes it. You know the taste of real joy because it has a tinge of sorrow in it. It has a tinge of poignant. It touches you. Often there's tears in your eyes with joy. So there is no joy distinct from or winnowed out from sorrow, from suffering, from just what is as it flows, as it is flowing. Flowing with birth and death, flowing with our own mortality. If you exist, you are dying. This is our condition. So, the case goes on to say that later, a character I do not know, and in fact, several people are attributed with this response. So we'll just say someone comment on this verse saying, it's like this, yet it isn't like this. It's like this, yet it isn't like this. All I can say about that is exactly. Exactly. Now we are firm in our open response. Now it is a million miles away from us, briefly. Of course, only briefly. Now we are once more appreciating our lunacy. This is the human condition. We are profoundly mixed. And that, of course, creates the path and creates the circumstances ultimately call joy. So the third piece I want to bring in conversation with these two is when a monk asks Fayan what the ancient Buddhas are. Now, in our sutras, we refer to the 7 ancient Buddhas. And I remember once someone saying, asking a teacher, look, you say it says 7 ancient Buddhas, but there's at least 9 or 10 people here. What's going on? And it was explained that, of course, the 7 ancient Buddhas are the Buddhas who preceded the Buddha. They were incarnations, or they were, I guess you could say, beta versions of the ultimate alpha Buddha. The final iteration being, well, the Buddha and us. So, the monk is asking Fayan what the ancient Buddhas are, a bit like that person years ago in a session. But really that monk is asking, what is self-nature and how can I touch it? How can I settle it? How can I convey it? You say I already have it. How the hell do I proceed? So Fayan responded, meeting that real question, he responded, right now, forget the 7 ancient Buddhas, right now, there's nothing to reject. That's what the 7 ancient Buddhas are. Right now, meaning at every point, there's nothing to reject. So when asked, then this monk went on badgering him and asked him, well, what about the mind of the ancient Buddhas? He then, I think you could say, showed what that mind was in the face of this somewhat obdurate monk, or questioning. He said, from it, meaning from nothing to reject, that mind, flow compassion and true equanimity. So he became very grandmotherly at that point, as in explaining directly. From nothing to reject flows compassion and true equanimity. Or neither joy nor sorrow. Who can say joy? Who can say sorrow? True equanimity. It reminds me a little of something that Pema Chodron once said, which is that nirvana is just what is happening, as it flows, just what is happening, minus your opinions about it. Mm-hmm. So that leaves us with nothing to reject, because what is an opinion? Except a subtle, or even not so subtle, rejection of circumstances as they turn, as they flow. A subtle fear inside that rejection of no separation. I think at some level, the self-referent, self-encapsulated self, confined self, is a little bit scared of this idea of no walls in the mind, no walls around the self, no separation. I think that's one of the reasons why people sometimes at a very rich point in their practice decide to sit there a little bit longer and not quite fall into falling away of body and mind. Not quite. Maybe I'll do that a bit later, they decide. But this sense of opinion, it's a form of standing apart. It's a form of looking on and finding something wrong. Finding wrong. Maybe even finding something that needs to be cast out, out of the universe if possible. And in a recent talk to a non-Zen community, sounds strange to say non-Zen, but it was an insight community. They invited me to give a talk. So I gave a talk on the question of, does right action rest upon something called wrong or not? And I started off by saying, yes, it does, and no, it does not. These are not alternative facts. These are one fact, as singular as birth and death is one fact, or form and emptiness is singular. And So I did look into the subtleties of right action and skillful response, and what happens to them when we find ourselves suddenly like Haku and Zenji, receiving abuse, persecution from somebody, when we suddenly find ourselves in the hell of being in the wrong, or being accused of being in the wrong, or accusing someone else of being in the wrong. This matter of wrong that somehow creates right action. So at such a moment, there is something that women identifies as the mind of right, a person of right and wrong. If he actually says, if you argue right and wrong, you are a person of right and wrong. In other words, you are someone who is accepting the proposition of embodying a split called right and wrong. And that's something that, from one point of view, we can never find our way to a clean action unless we know what a muddy or a sticky or a kind of bargaining, self-concerned action might look like. There's a lot of fine discernment to go on here. But the question of being split down the middle, of being a person bargaining to be in the right, and therefore casting out the other in some form, the other person, the one who must be wrong. And if you want an example of someone bargaining in the most weaselly way to be right, in the right, not in the wrong, here's the words of Mark Zuckerberg from the film The Facebook Dilemma. This is what he said. I think it's more useful to make things happen and then apologize later than it is to make sure that you dot all your I's now and then just not get stuff done. We laugh, but the egregious quality of that is, it stinks. We know how much damage this getting stuff done now, meaning making an incredible fortune out of that getting stuff done now, and doubling back to cover your tracks later with an apology, do it now, apologize later, is so very different from another person. Do you remember, did many people here will see that presentation to the Davos gathering by 16-year-old girl, Greta Thunberg? She spoke true words to the most powerful, richest, the richest people in the world. Someone pointed out that 1,700 of the 3,000 people came in their own private jet to that gathering. She actually, if you didn't hear her, she's 16 years old. She looks about 12. She has been demonstrating every single day, I think it is, every day, for about the last 3 years, carrying out a tireless demonstration in Sweden, her own country, about climate change. And she was actually saying to the people in that room, pretty much, I'll try and find an example of what she said. She said, some people say that the climate crisis is something that we all have created, but that is not true. Because if everyone is guilty, then somehow no one is quite to blame, right? And someone is to blame. Some people, some companies, some decision makers in particular have known, and that would include Mark Zuckerberg, have known exactly what priceless values they have been sacrificing to make unimaginable amounts of money And I think many of you here today belong to that group of people. Astonishing. This young girl just stood there. She said, "Our house is on fire. I am here to say, our house is on fire," echoing, of course, the words of the Buddha. We are living in a house on fire. And she went on to say we must change almost everything in our current societies. And she made this very good point. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. So let's tell that to our politicians, because the true carbon footprint of Australians is probably one of the biggest in the world. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope, but I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. So, this sense of, in that those two put together against each other rather, you do have a sense, I think, that when you see someone scrambling not to be in the wrong, they become more and more wrong. When they speak, I guess you could say, genuine words, there's actually in her words, there isn't, strangely enough, there isn't blame. There's clarity, there's clarity about, let's look at who really is, who is most embodying the forces that are holding back from action. Let's look directly in your faces and name you. So there is a sense here, I think, of something more generous, something generous and something that is for all beings, something that is more aware of all beings being one body, profoundly more aware, not trapped in defense of the self at all. So, so this question of the good being something not quite the same as something that you do good. In the case of Greta Thunberg, she is actually, in a sense, pointing implicitly to the good that is being trashed in our world at this moment, with climate change in particular. If you look at the words "the good" as opposed to or as distinct from doing good, one thing I think you can say about the good is a little bit like, when we were walking today in the bush, in the forest, by the river, the way of the Buddha is intrinsically accomplished and perfect. There's an insight into the instantly apparent nature of the good. It is in plain sight. It is complete. It has integrity. Each thing, each naturally occurring thing has integrity. It embodies the good. When you feel somebody has the right to speak about or to or from the good, it's instantly recognizable. The word goodness is a bit more tricky. It's something that in a way needs definition and defense, but the good, I think, does not. Humans recognize the good. It subsists in the most simple and ordinary things. It is unimpeachable. We can estrange ourselves from it, but we cannot fall out of it. It has such interesting characteristics. It can't be done or undone. But from another point of view, it is one endless repair. The impermanence you can think of as everything falling away all the time. From another point of view, it's the very motor of creativity, one thing constantly becoming another, one thing, a tear in your skin healing into a scar. The good. There it is, the good. So when we hear those beautiful words of Nyakao, Mr. Precarious, Mr. Bird's Nest, when he said, as for doing evil, just avoid it, well, there are words that initiate a lifelong, deep searching and shaping process, character shaping. Yamada Cohen was asked by Robert Aitken, what is Zen for? What's it about? And Yamada said, it is the perfection of character. Very interesting. Look at the moral force or the ethical force of that, but also look at the sense of character. You know, everything out there in the natural world has instant, recognizable character. It is so distinct. Couldn't be more perfect, you know. It is the integrity of each thing that shines in these words, the good. And I think you could say, as for the good, practice sharing it. Look at the generosity, the practice of dana in that. Look at the sense that the good belongs to everybody. All we can do is practice sharing it with generosity and equality and justice. I'd say that all the precepts are gathered into this. All the precepts. As for the good, practice sharing it. And I want to read you something from towards the end of a novel that I've been rereading. Last night we heard from bits of Tolstoy. Tonight I've been rereading Willa Cather's wonderful book, My Antonia. I read it many years ago and then reread it and loved it all over again. We learn quite early that the character, who's not in any obvious way the central character of this book, she's oblique to many parts of the story. Somehow, though, she is the firm spine and inspiring character in it. She's young, she's very poor, she has a hard life. She's a Czechoslovakian migrant to the Great Plains in America I don't actually remember the date for this, be the turn of the century, I think. The turning of the sod, you know, it was still prairie at that point, so it was very primitive conditions. But her strong heart shines through the whole novel, and by the time we get to the end, the character who tells the story is a boy slightly younger than her. And he sort of always loved her, almost like a sister, almost like he'd love to have had her as a lover, but that wasn't going to happen. He was younger than her. He just, in a way, made himself a kind of follower of her. I don't think he realised that till the very end, though. So he visits her again. By this stage, they're both in their 40s, and she's had a very hard life. Has about 8 children who she loves dearly. They have very little money. They live on a farm. She had a difficult time early in her young adulthood, which I won't go into, but here she is in a rather battered condition by life. But now he says this about her. He looks at her and sees her in her family context after not seeing her for many years. This is what he says. Very simple statement. All the strong things of her heart came out in her body that had been so tireless in serving generous emotions. Now, I found that a very arresting sentence. All the strong things of her heart came out in her body that had been so tireless in serving generous emotions. So the strong things of the heart, that's what I would call the good. That which we recognize, it's like a touchstone, you know, the strong things of the heart. There's no argument about them. We know them. We know what they are. We know the good. And he's saying it's written directly in her body, into her body, meaning that it's evident in her touch, in her actions, in her gestures, in the way she stands and moves in the world and touches trees or children or whatever she does. Written directly into the body. Character is written directly into the body of each of us. And then he goes on and says, tireless, tireless. Had been so tireless. She had been, these strong things of her heart came out in her body that had been so tireless in serving generous emotions. And I think tireless is a way of understanding the beautiful arduousness of practice. We have to be tireless. And we're lucky to be tireless. You know, we're lucky to have the call on us to be tireless. I'm reminded of, you know, the phrase I've often referred to from the beautiful daily struggle to be congruent from Paulo Freire at the end of his life, when he was asked, what is the most important thing? He said, the beautiful daily struggle to be congruent. Congruent meaning perfect fit, impossible to tell apart from evolving circumstances, from turning with circumstances. And then that final phrase, tireless in serving generous emotions. I think it's interesting to compare that with, as for the good, practice sharing it. Serving generous emotions. Practice sharing the good. I don't think you'll hear too many people these days, excuse me, taking upon themselves to look in the direction of generous emotions. But isn't that the very opposite of mean-spiritedness and ill will? Generous emotions are the flowing out, the strong containment of practice, the strong self-mastery, self-discipline of practice, which enables this flowing out directly into the world. Excuse me. So look, finally, since it's running a bit late here, I want to just touch into that Lojong slogan of appreciate your lunacy. Our lunacy, of course, must be appreciated because it creates the difficulty that makes the way genuine, creates the difficulty that evolves the strength of our own character. It is deeply valuable. And the way that the Lojong slogan there could be translated is make offerings to demons. Now in our in our formal meal service, as people will know here, we make an offering of food to the hungry ghosts, appreciating that they are our demons, these hungry ghosts. Our greed, our insatiable greed is the hungry ghosts. We acknowledge them. Excuse me, I'm sorry about my throat. But I'll just very briefly read you what Norman Fisher says about this make offerings to demons. He says, bow to your own weakness, your own craziness, your own resistance. Congratulate yourself for them, appreciate them. Truly it is a marvel the extent to which we are selfish, confused, lazy, resentful, and so on. We come by these things honestly. We have been well trained to manifest them at every turn. This is the prodigy of human life bursting forth at its seams. It is the effect of our upbringing, our society, which we appreciate even as we are trying to tame it and bring it gently round to the good. So we make offerings to the demons inside us. We develop a sense of humorous appreciation for our own stupidity. We are in good company after all. We can laugh at ourselves at last. As for asking for help or praying for help, the very word precariousness has within it the root of the same word as prayer. You know, to make imprecation is to offer or call out a prayer or a call for help. So to be precarious, you could say, is to be in a constant state of prayer of sorts. Practice is a kind of prayer in acknowledgement of our own precariousness. There's a lot to see in this, and I want to explore it a bit more tomorrow night, especially in terms of really difficult moments of grief and sorrow. But turning with circumstances, rejecting nothing, actually means there's nothing to reject in the end. When you turn with circumstances, there is nothing outside it, nothing to oppose or reject. And with nothing to reject, joy does appear. Joy, you could almost say, is the state of nothing to reject. Joy is the way becoming genuine through difficulty. And since I have just one more minute, I'm going to end with the final words of The Left Hand of Darkness. This is Ursula Le Guin's, one of her two most wondrous novels. If you don't know it, hunt it out. Do you know it? Do people know it? Yes. The Left Hand of Darkness is extraordinary. It does involve a sort of long journey across an icy waste of a world, but with one of the best companions in the world, this wonderful character, who it turns out on this planet, the planet they're on, because she's a science fiction writer, but of course the best science fiction is about our world. And this character, Gen, is the name of the character. Gen turns out to belong to a race of people who can change gender. If they fall into a state of desire to the other, they can decide male or female, what will I be? They go into a state of what's called chema in the novel, like estrus almost. But when they do, it's a state of transformation. And so everybody shares all genders and deeply appreciates it from all angles. So it's a beautiful novel. But anyway, it was a very hard journey, very dangerous journey. And this is what happened. These are the words at the end of that novel. Sometimes, as I'm falling asleep in a dark, quiet room, I have for a moment a great and treasurable sense of what I've been through. I'm not trying to say that I was happy during those weeks of hauling a sledge across an ice sheet in the dead of winter. I was hungry, overstrained, and often anxious, and it all got worse the longer it went on. A little bit like some session sets a day. I certainly wasn't happy. Happiness has nothing to do with it. Happiness has to do with reason, and only reason expects or earns it. What I was given was the thing you can't earn and can't keep, and often don't even recognize at the time. I mean joy. And I think if you just understand that all the miles of a very difficult journey are worth a moment of genuine joy that make us genuine. We call it realization. It is joy. It is the state of nothing possibly able to be rejected. No self to reject it. And those very last words, I mean joy. How about taking that as a koan? I mean joy. I'll leave you with that.